Hello, and welcome to VAC's webinar, Food Safety Liability Basics. Our guest presenter is Eva Caison. I'm Samantha Gasson, VAC's Humane Farming Program Director, and I will be moderating the session. Thank you for joining us. Before we dive right in, let me take a minute or two to do a few quick introductions. Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT, is a national nonprofit organization that works to ensure that all food-producing animals are raised in a humane and healthy manner. We accomplish this by supporting humane farmers through our Humane Farming Program, promoting policies that make foods from animals safe and healthy to eat through our Safe and Healthy Foods program, and generally help consumers make informed food choices. Our funder farmer grants and our mentorship program applications are now open. Please visit our website at foodanimalconcerns.trust.org to learn more about our farmer services. As always, I would like to introduce my wonderful colleague, Catherine Hoke, who will be in the wings, reading the wings, and a huge thank you. Catherine, I really appreciate you doing this with me. At this time, I am delighted to introduce our esteemed presenter, Eva Caison. Eva is the Education Program Director at Farm Commons and leads the development of educational curriculum, ensuring that the workshops empower the agricultural community with critical knowledge and skills. Eva has ancestral farming roots stretching from the island of Samoa to southern Appalachia. She holds a master's degree in food and agricultural law and policy from Vermont Law School and a bachelor's degree in anthropology from Shawnee, whatever. What is that, Eva? How do you pronounce that?
The last one, Sawney. You got it.
Sawney. Okay, the University of the South. She has taught food policy courses at Guilford College, which is in North Carolina, for Sustainable Food Systems Department, and has operated her own small farm business in Central North Carolina. She is passionate about guiding farmers and ranchers nationwide through Farm Commons programming, and she connects them with knowledge and tools that cultivate healthy farm business relationships. We are super lucky to have such an experienced presenter with us today to talk about how you can make sure that you are prepared when it comes to food safety with your farm products. Without further ado, I'll turn the floor over to you, Eva, so that you may begin your presentation. Eva, it is all yours.
Super. Thank you, Samantha and Catherine, and everyone for joining us. I'm happy to be here. All right, so welcome to our webinar on, just as Samantha said, food safety. We're going to be focusing in on the legal aspect of liability related to food safety, covering the good, the bad, and the ugly reality of this topic. By the end of our time together, my hope is that you will understand ways that you can become liable for a food safety incident so that you can learn to identify that risk and proactively plan to manage it. And also understanding the role of insurance in that management plan, and the details and things to look out for with the insurance policies themselves. So you should hopefully walk away from this program with some action steps that can help you be better prepared for a potential food safety incident occurring on your farm from the legal standpoint. So I have about a 40-ish minute presentation that I plan to share, and aim to save about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A, question and answer time, discussion. But as questions come up for you, please do utilize the chat box and share those questions. Can't promise that we'll get to all of them, but Samantha and Catherine will be on the lookout, and we'll pull a few questions that we can address, right in that moment. So if you haven't heard about Farm Commons before, we are similar to FACT, a national nonprofit organization, and our mission is to empower agricultural communities to address their own legal vulnerabilities with an ecosystem of support. And so that's, you may have a legal issue and go into an attorney and be very familiar with that mode of legal services. This is something more communal and comprehensive. Through our work, we have attorneys on our staff as well as educators, and we work together to create plain language guides, interactive workshops, webinars like this one, podcasts, and a question and answer discussion platform to share baseline legal knowledge that can help any farm and any ranch across the country. We believe strongly in leadership development within farm law, where the solutions that you come up with on your farms are powerful, they're real, and so solutions by and for farmers are what we aim to uplift. Our work membership is a part of what makes it possible, and we are very grateful to have FACT as institutional members. We also have a producer membership opportunity that I'll be sharing more about later on if that meets your needs. But because FACT is a member of ours, if there's any resources that I mention or any resources that you come across on our website that you would like access to, copies of a PDF, for instance, you can certainly reach out to Samantha and Catherine and they can grab that for you. So before I get into things, I do want to share that the law is enormous and our specialty is farm business law issues. And so it's very much, the boring paperwork stuff, agreements, contracts, insurance. I'm going to be talking a lot about insurance today. And that bit about the law being vast is important because, I'm going to touch on quite a few things today and we can't get into all of them in depth. But again, my goal is to give you some working knowledge about how food safety liability works so that you can, right away begin to better manage the liability of your farm products with regards to food safety. All right, so let's get right into this reality that we live in as people who consume. I'm a consumer of food. You are both a consumer and a producer of food. And a direct market producer, a farmer or rancher's worst fear, one of them, is someone getting sick from the food that they produce. And the typical culprits of foodborne illness can easily be remembered with the acronym SEL. Salmonella, E. coli, and Listeria. These are three things that we do not want to be bringing to market, but the risk is real for them to end up there. These dangerous bacteria are pretty sneaky. Salmonella can show up in fresh salad greens, unsuspecting kale that's chopped up for a slide of slaw that a customer brings to a barbecue. It can be covered in E. coli. And Listeria can make its way into caramel apples that might be given out at a farm, a harvest festival or at the end of a farm tour. The origination point of these bacteria can be very tricky to pin down, given that irrigation water, worker hygiene, harvesting and packing equipment, as well as wildlife visitors, they are all possible vectors that are capable of transmitting pathogens. So whatever the case or the causes may be, this is not something that anybody wants to happen on their farm or ranch. But sometimes it's unavoidable. And that's why, the risk is real. The Center for Disease Control, the CDC, estimates that each year, 48 million people get sick and 128,000 are hospitalized and 3,000 people die from foodborne illness in the United States. And usually these incidents are minor, but there are those cases that were serious. And, even if there are a few of them, they haunt farms, because it's such a big concern that this really can happen. And one such case is when in 2011, 33 people died after eating listeria-tainted cantaloupe in Colorado in 2011. The outbreak was traced back to a cantaloupe farm that was owned by two brothers, and they were eventually ordered to pay $150,000 in restitution and perform 100 hours of community service. So risk is real, consequences are real. People get sick, people die. And the bottom line here, and perhaps the reason that you're attending this webinar, is because food safety risks pose real legal risks for farm businesses. With the sale of your farm products, whether raw or processed, comes that risk of people getting sick from consuming them. And that does have the potential to incur fines and penalties, as well as threaten the farm's ability to thrive or even survive. Which can include damages to reputation and consumer trust. And so let's use these cantaloupes and the folks who farm them as an example. We're going to start doing some legal analysis here. Were those brothers liable for everything and anything that happens because it was their cantaloupes that were involved? Well, no, not necessarily. There are some conditions when, yes, simply selling a cantaloupe that is contaminated can leave you with a fine or a penalty, but it's less common. What's more common is that a farmer is held liable because they were negligent. By contrast, if they were not negligent, then it's less likely they would end up with legal liability. And so today, that's what we're going to focus on, negligence and how it works in the food safety context. So let's say that, your neighbor grows cantaloupes like those brothers in Colorado, and you're thinking about their sales, and you're wondering, oh, hey, could my neighbor become liable if someone gets sick after consuming those cantaloupes? Well, the basic answer is yes, if the neighbor's actions were negligent. This means, in this case, that the definition of negligence is very important. So in common usage, we tend to say someone is negligent if they are careless, if they don't pay attention, and if they don't seem to care about the welfare of others. And so we ask, is that what the law considers to be negligent? Well, not exactly. That would be too easy. The law is very precise. So from a legal perspective, negligence is not carelessness or disregard for others. It's not being a neglectful person. Instead, it is, in this case with our neighbor, they might be negligent if they acted less reasonably than the average farmer would have acted under similar circumstances. So essentially, negligence is the failure to do what a reasonable person under similar circumstances would have done. And so our cantaloupe farmer would be considered negligent if their actions in growing, irrigating, harvesting, handling, and packing the cantaloupe were outside of the norm, if they were less than what the average farmer would have done, being the average farmer in their area who grows similar crops. And so at this point, if you're feeling like a little bit confused, this is very common. It's like, who is the average farmer? What does the average farmer do? Is anyone putting out a survey asking, in this case, cantaloupe growers how they irrigate and harvest? Are there manuals that say how to do these things? I hope you're chuckling because, farmers, there's rarely a manual that will tell you how to run your farm. Yours in particular. There are many farming books out there that are fine and good. But there's no manual to tell you exactly what to do. So this information on the average farmer can be pretty hard to come by. So in many cases, no, we can't be certain about what the average farmer does. But what we can be certain of is that we will argue about it. And so both sides start working on their best cases. The injured person will say, gosh, the farmer's food safety practices were much less robust than other farmers. And then the farmer will argue, hey, my food safety practices were just like every other farmer's. And so we ask, as the outside party, which side is right? We're trying to come to a decision. And we'll only find out when a judge or a jury decides. So this is a rough spot to be in. We need a sense of how to move forward. And there is a silver lining. There are a few things that we can do within the uncertainty. So with a cantaloupe farmer, what are the takeaways? What do we do? Well, the first is do what other farmers do. This especially includes following any regulations that are designed to protect food safety, like the Food Safety Modernization Act, FSMA. This law requires that farmers take steps like test the source of their irrigation water and conduct employee training. Now, not all farmers are required to comply with FSMA due to certain thresholds. Folks that are especially small and market their products locally, they don't have to test their irrigation water, for example. So sure, farmers who don't have to comply with FSMA may not be liable for actually violating FSMA. However, their decision not to do what most other farmers do may leave them vulnerable to a claim of negligence. And so the safest decision is to keep pace with other farmers and the laws in place to protect food safety, even if you don't have to comply. And so some folks will want to stay even more ahead of the curve. And if you're doing more than everyone else, then you're better protected. So it's almost like this race to see who could be the most food safe on the farm. And that's kind of like taking it too far. And that, that's leads to a bit of like an arms race with food safety practices. But it is why we're seeing an ever increasing caution and labeling in our daily lives. Companies, they want to stay ahead of their peers, and so they implement, even more food safety precautions and measures. It's really just a fact of life in our commercial climate. But, back to the farmers, make no mistake, even if our cantaloupe producer is the safest farmer in the entire state, they still need insurance. They need to prove that they were a safe farm in court, and they need to explain their practices and line them up against what other average farmers who are growing similar crops are doing. They need data, and they need evidence to back up that they are not negligent. And so they need an attorney. They need an expert to make those arguments for them, to do that research and collect the data that will prove that they did exactly what the next or average farmer would have done. And that, of course, is very expensive. But that doesn't mean, you need to go start asking around for an attorney to keep on retainer in case something like this happens. No, the thing to do is to get insurance. That's the next action step. When most people think about insurance, they only think about a source of funds to actually cover the liability, the resulting medical costs and damages to the injured person. But it's really so much more than that. Your insurance company is likely, and I do want you to confirm, to provide you with an attorney to defend you. And you might be wondering, oh, why would they provide me with an attorney? Like, won't they just pay out on the resulting liability? Well, they generally will pay for an attorney to defend you because they're on the hook for the resulting liability. So if you are proved responsible, the insurance company will have to pay out for the medical costs and damages to the injured person. And so they want to avoid liability in the first place. So they'll fight hard in court to try and prove that you were not negligent. And so insurance is like a retainer on an expert attorney who is ready to defend your practices. And that's also why insurance companies may have standards or rules about what types of farms and practices they will or won't cover. Or they may require you to do certain things in terms of food safety. And that's because they know they have to defend those practices in court if something bad happens. So food safety insurance can help, provide an attorney to go to bat for you, and it can also help with covering your own costs. So if you do end up, life forces, heaven forbid, that you end up like the Colorado cantaloupe farmers, you would be in a situation where you need to recall your produce and pay for what is potentially a very expensive cleaning and resetting of your equipment to ensure that, whatever the microbes were, they aren't hanging around waiting for another ride to the restaurant, to the market, to the grocery store. So insurance is incredibly valuable and is essential for even the safest of farms. So I'm going to spend the rest of our time discussing food safety insurance and what you need to look out for. But before we get there, I do want to just take a moment to recognize that, if this information is new to you, you might feel a little deflated. As farmers, you're in it to grow good food for people. You do your best to control risk and manage your production to be successful. And many farmers are also in it to build community, to establish connections with people who you know and trust and care for. And so it can be hard to think that they might sue you at the first chance of getting sick, And so before we get into insurance, I just want to acknowledge those feelings and intentions because they really are relevant to this aspect of doing business, and they do matter. So at this point, we usually get some complaints from folks in the crowd, like, people are so litigious. Like, do we have to sue the moment we get sick? Can't we trust anyone to take responsibility or accept risks anymore? Like, they bought the food, it's farm fresh. There's birds, there's wildlife, they go to the bathroom too. Can't people accept risks anymore? Well, you might feel better or worse, depending, to know that it isn't always the injured person who is driving the lawsuit bus. It's generally their health insurance company. Because treatment for a food safety illness can involve kidney damage that's followed by a lifetime of dialysis or even a kidney transplant, which involves tremendous long-term costs in medical care and prescription drugs. And the insurance company would like to be paid back for that. And if they can win a judgment awarding them medical costs, they will do it. And the thing to know here is that when we as individuals buy private health insurance, we sign over the right to sue in our own name for injuries our health insurance company pays to treat. So it's not that people are, especially mistrusting or mean these days. It's that this is what the medical and the legal system have created for us. And this further reinforces the need for a good attorney. You'll be going up against the health insurance company's attorney in this situation, and they will put their best folks forward to win their case. And so you also need someone who has expertise and availability to help you out. And again, insurance is a good way to secure that. So best risk management says to get insurance, and you've probably heard it a million times. I've said it at least 5 times in this presentation. But perhaps you're left with a feeling of, that's not helpful, or you're feeling this, question mark emerge when you think about food safety insurance. And if you're feeling this way and you're not sure about your insurance coverage, whether you have it or how you might get it, your instincts are really good because it is very hard to know for sure if you have the right insurance coverage, if you happen to get it. And why is it hard? Well, this is a question that Farm Commons worked on answering over the course of 1.5 years. We carried out a research project to try and answer, why is it so hard to know if we have the right insurance coverage? We read hundreds of pages of policies and we interviewed many people, including farmers, and going over their food safety liability policies. And we also talked to insurance experts. And what we found was that foodborne illness is rarely ever covered by insurers, even if the policy title or name gives you the impression that you're covered. And so at Farm Commons, we like to give you all the facts up front and in as straightforward a manner as possible. So on the next slide, I've outlined some common coverage trends and uncertainties about food safety insurance. And we'll work through each of those, and then we'll end up with some tips for moving forward in this pretty gray area climate. So our project revealed a few clear trends around food safety liability coverage. And in a nutshell, they are: 1, foreign object injury is covered. 2, communicable disease injury is not. 3, we need to be aware of or beware of the virus/bacteria endorsement or exclusion. And 4, watch out for a business exclusion if you do any value-added production, like making jams, pickles, sauces, prepared foods, that kind of thing. So I'll address each one in turn. So the first coverage trend, foreign object injuries. Typical farm liability policies do include coverage for, the odd nail or other foreign objects that can turn up, especially in salad mixes, things like bagged spinach and other crops where loose items can get dropped in and lost. In all of the policies that we reviewed, injuries that are caused by foreign objects, or basically anything that is not food, and that would be pretty surprising to find in your food, like a shard of glass, is covered. And this is something that people have often experienced in a restaurant context. Have you ever been out to eat and maybe discovered a shard of glass mixed in with your iced water or in your food, or a broken piece of plastic bit in your pancake? That happened to my mother. When this happens, we hopefully will see it and pass the food or drink back before ingesting, but it could be a totally different story if swallowed. That's a terrible situation. The point is that these strange things do happen, and that's why they often show up in insurance policies. And so in this case, the insurance company would delegate an attorney who would gather the evidence that you did everything the average farmer would do to keep foreign objects out of your spinach, like intentional harvesting, covering the harvest bins, and using equipment that's in working order so that it's not dropping bolts and screws into the food. Again, there are other avenues to be potentially liable, but we're focusing on negligence as the most common avenue. The second coverage trend deals with communicable disease. Unlike foreign object contamination, the glass shards in the drink scenario, communicable disease is usually excluded from coverage. A typical exclusion will go something like bodily injury or property damage arising out of the transmission of communicable disease by an insured. These exclusions may be found lurking anywhere in your policy. And typically, your policy will say within the body of the agreement what is covered, and then we'll list numerous types of incidents that are not covered. And those are the exclusions. And the communicable disease provision is usually hidden in there somewhere. So what does that mean? What does this mean? What is a communicable disease? Well, in a classic sense, we're talking about, a cold, the flu. It's going around right now. It's winter time. You get it from other people, and that is something we think of as a disease. So yes, generally no coverage if your worker comes to work sick and someone gets the flu. Usually isn't a big problem. It's not what we think of when we think of risk. But what about Salmonella, E. coli, and Listeria, cell? Are any of them communicable diseases? Well, if you get sick from Salmonella, isn't that a disease? And isn't it communicable? We know it transfers to people, and fecal matter contamination from another person could be the source. So that means it is a communicable disease, and thus no coverage, right? Or is Salmonella not communicable because 94% of the cases come from food from a non-human vector? And if Salmonella is not communicable, then it is covered, and that's really awesome and good, and I can have confidence in that, right? Well, to answer those questions, we need to know what communicable means. So we'll start in a pretty practical place, the dictionary. So this is the dictionary, Merriam-Webster. It's not a court of law, but look at the bottom that I've circled where it says that diseases that spread through vectors, not direct contact with another person, are not communicable. But you can get Salmonella both ways. Statistics show that 96% of people get Salmonella through food, through other vectors. Okay, fine. But there is 4% that get it from another person. So which is it? We don't know. We don't know at Farm Commons how this would be read in court. There are arguments on both sides that Salmonella is and is not communicable. So what do we do? Well, the plot thickens. Even if we say that 94% of the time Salmonella is not communicable, and thus it is not covered by insurance, there's another part of most insurance policies we need to reckon with. And that's number 3 of the coverage trends. Beware the dry rot / bacteria / virus exclusion. Even if our foodborne illnesses survive the communicable disease exclusion, there's another exclusion that likely will knock them out of the coverage ring. Tacked on to many of these policies that we reviewed is something called this long exclusion, dry rot bacteria virus. These types of exclusions state that coverage for this type of damage is included, which sounds really good. You know, Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria, the nasty cells and other bugs, those are viruses and bacteria, right? Okay, amazing. They're covered. We got really excited, but then we kept reading. The provision then goes on to say actually that injury from bacteria and viruses is not covered if it arises out of anything intended for bodily consumption. Super duper frustrating. Because that means if a customer eats something that isn't food and gets sick from Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria, insurance will likely cover it. But it's not a for sure. And even if it wasn't for sure, that's not the kind of coverage that most farmers and ranchers need, because people are meant to eat the food. So at the end of the day, a farmer could argue that Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria are not communicable diseases, and thus they should have coverage. But the insurance company will probably argue that cell are most certainly bacteria, and that an injury resulting from their presence on anything intended for bodily consumption, like food, is not covered. And so who wins? Which is it? The honest answer is that we don't know. These things need to get litigated, to get resolved, and lawsuits are often settled before they get to court because the litigation process is very expensive. And so we don't actually get a court ruling. And so we continue in our uncertainty. But there's one more coverage trend to address before we start to wrap up here with some steps for moving forward. Watch out for the business exclusion. Whether your food safety liability coverage is limited to those foreign objects, you know, the errant nail, or if it is a rare one that actually covers foodborne illness, those policies do exist. Still be aware that in a standard farm liability policy, this coverage only extends to farming activities, not business activities. To translate that insurance speak, what that means is that liability coverage only extends to the sale of raw farm products sold on the farm or at a roadside stand. So if you're selling anywhere else, such as at a farmer's market or a food co-op, or if you are selling anything else, such as value-added products like sauces, pickles, tinctures, prepared foods, you are not covered. So let's take that example, you know, dried products, jams, jellies, pickles, other goods that you might make for sale in your home kitchen. It may be perfectly legal for you to do that, you know. It may be allowed under your state's cottage food regulations, which means that the state won't come after you for violating their food safety statutes that require food to be produced in a licensed facility. We're talking about something different here. If you violate state law, certainly the state can bring a lawsuit against you. But even if you followed all the state laws for cottage food production and you make those jams and jellies and sauces, an injured person can still bring a lawsuit claiming that you are negligent. And an insurance company can still say, hey, we didn't insure your jams and pickles. You are on your own to defend yourself. So if you are doing any value-added processing, including freezing, drying, or making custom salad mixes, blending produce together, you may need additional coverage to address your non-farming ventures. At this point, if what I'm sharing is concerning to you and you are feeling uneasy about your own coverage, that is very normal and understandable. You know, I believe, Farm Commons believes that you deserve answers, and there are some ways to try and get them. So the first thing you can try is investigating your farm liability policy yourself, if you have one. Knowledge is certainly power, and you do need to know what you've got, because if you have an insurance policy, you're paying for it, and we need to know what you have. While we recommend that, reading through it, as it will give you a sense of empowerment and having a baseline understanding of what is and isn't in your policy. We also recommend that you don't attempt this without any guidance. A farm liability policy can be a pretty weedy, potentially scary place to wander through alone, because it is a bit of a confusing maze of legalese and contradictions and, certain sections of the policy referring to other pages, and you have to kind of keep up with all that. And there's, a hideous mishmash of terms and exclusions and endorsements, all kinds of bits that just don't seem to fit together, but somehow they do. So we have created something to help make that journey easier. We have a food safety liability guide at our website that can guide you through common clauses and terms that you can reference as you read through your farm liability policy or food safety liability policy. It's called the Farmer's Guide to Food Safety Liability. I have a link here that I will grab and drop into the chat. This one I think might be behind the membership paywall. I'm not sure. It might still be up for access, but if you cannot see it, FACT can certainly get you access to that as a PDF handout. So the second option is to talk with your insurance agent. And these questions that are up on the slide are what you can ask them. Should I be aware of any food safety practices you require farms to adopt? Am I covered for foreign objects? Am I covered for Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria contamination that might result from A, contaminated irrigation water, B, equipment malfunction, so on and so forth, depending on your specific farm risks or your farm's exposure? And then, do I need a business endorsement? And that's for you folks who are doing value-added production. You may not think, blending different salads together is value-added, but because you are doing that active blending, even though it's still technically like a raw product, that will still be something you want to check in on for the business endorsement. Definitely for anything that you're canning, cooking, processing. So more solutions for moving forward. With talking to the insurance agent, do understand that this is easier said than done. When you get on the phone with them or a meeting, they may not be able to answer your questions or be able to provide you with an answer in writing. And so the result might leave you feeling like you've been offered more than what you need. They might say, well, based on all your concerns, you need a full product liability policy, which you may or may not be able to afford. And it may be, more than you actually need for your scale of production. But still, knowledge is power. And if you at least know where your risk exposure is, you can make, conscious choices to keep taking those risks if that's the right thing for you. You know your own tolerance for risk, and you can certainly let that be your guide. And one more thing that maybe goes without saying, but in case it doesn't, I will say it anyways. Prevention is so important. Prevention, prevention, prevention. Following procedures from the Produce Safety Rule of FSMA and GAP certification, good agricultural practices, those protocols, and preventing all the cells from getting into your food in the first place, that is your first line of prevention. So keep building your food safety knowledge and put those practices in place on your operation. All the efforts that you can take to improve the safety of your food will make any incident less likely. It won't 100% prevent it because, accidents and weird things happen. And that is also why you still need insurance. Even the safest of farms need insurance to be able to prove that you are a super safe farm. So coverage is still highly worthwhile, even as you, do the work to learn and instill and implement systems on your farm to boost your food safety. I do have one last tip for you, which is a legal one. And that is, consider forming a limited liability entity, such as an LLC, a limited liability company, or a corporation. Why? Well, if something awful does happen, food safety wise, and you are sued, if you have an LLC or corporation, your personal assets will be protected. You may still, lose business assets if you don't have business, insurance for those business assets. But this is a good last line of defense for your personal assets, such as land, a second home, those stocks, all that. All right, so I've shared quite a bit of information with you all. I have a couple extra tidbits just about Farm Commons membership in general, and then we'll get into Q&A. So this style of programming and, farm law topics, if, this piqued your interest and you're curious to learn more about how you can expand your legal resilience for your farm or ranch, we have an amazing workshop called Discovering Resilience, a legal workshop for farmers and ranchers, where you learn the 10 best legal practices across employment, land access, insurance, diversification, business structures, and more. And it's a 5-week program if you take it live or anytime self-paced. Throughout that time, you are basically creating a customized action plan for your business. And if you'd like to join us for the next live session, it starts on Monday, January 27th, and we'd be happy to have you. We'd love to have you. To register, you do need to be a member. And if you're interested in working through, all our guides, we have over 100 different guides addressing things like botanical production, hosting events on the farm, how to manage volunteer and intern programs from a legal perspective, so many different topics. We have, checklists, models, tons of stuff on our website, self-paced courses on all kinds of topics, as well as a Q&A platform that's about to relaunch in 2025 that will be a very interactive discussion board. So those are all perks of membership. We'd love to have you. If you'd like to join, the cost of annual membership is $99. And with FACT, you get a 30% off coupon code with FACT30. That's good through January 5th of 2025, which is right around the corner. Can't believe it, but it's coming for us. And no pressure. Like I said in the beginning, FACT is an institutional member. If there are any resource titles that are behind the paywall that you want access to, let Samantha and Catherine know, and they can get you a PDF. All right. Thanks, everyone. Happy to stick around for Q&A if there's any questions.
All right, we do have some questions, but before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and run our end of webinar poll. If you guys wouldn't mind filling that out, it really is helpful for us when we're looking for funding and things like that. I'm going to go ahead, if you wouldn't mind, Eva, if you wouldn't mind just unsharing your screen. All right. And we are going to go ahead and start with questions. If you've put a question in the chat and you would like it to be answered, please go ahead and copy and paste it into the Q&A. I'm not able to put anything in the Q&A, so that would be very helpful on my part. Okay. So we have a question from Joseph, and he asks, do farmers that perform exaggerated food safety precautions and practices set a standard that hurts other farmers, that we're not able to maintain unrealistic standards? And would these farmers become the new standard if there was enough of them supporting unrealistic standards? Or the organizations that protect people from being judged based off of unrealistic standards?
Yeah, that's a really important question. Thanks, Joseph. I alluded a bit to it in the presentation, where because of this question of negligence of what is the average farmer doing, and did a farmer act as the average farmer would, it is a matter of culture. And so if there are many farmers of a similar scale, growing similar crops, who are maintaining what some other maybe beginning producers would see as unrealistic food safety standards, yeah, it would raise the bar for what maybe another producer who isn't implementing as many food safety standards, it does put some pressure on them to where their legal risk exposure is a bit higher, because there's more room for them to be negligent if more of their peers are adhering to expanded standards. Okay. I do not know if there's any organizations that are protecting people from being judged based off of those unrealistic standards? Yeah, that's a great question. I'd be curious too.
So just so everybody knows, we do have more webinars in our coming up over the next couple of months, January, February, and March, and then into a little bit into April. We have quite a few webinars with Farm Commons. We've been an institutional member with them for a while. So if you just go to our webinar page, I already shared a link for the Forming an LLC webinar, but we've got quite a few others going back years. And if you just type Food Commons into the search on our website, then you'll get everything that they've ever done with us, which is pretty amazing. And I will actually make a note for myself to send all of that to you in the follow-up email tomorrow. Okay. Diane asks, do you have any suggestions aside from what each state requires for selling of roadside chicken eggs? And so I actually had a question before you answer that. So when you're talking about farm liability, that's different from product liability, right?
Farm liability can include product liability resulting from the business, but farm liability is generally like people coming onto the property.
Okay. So you should have
Yeah.
both. If you're selling at a farmer's market, most farmers markets would expect you to have product liability, listing them as additionally insured. So a lot of the pitfalls you were talking about and things to look for in your farm liability, they would be covered in a product liability. So if you're making jams and jellies and stuff or selling road eggs at the farmer's market or on the side of the road, then your product liability, you would have to have product liability to cover that, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, quite a few producers assume that farm liability policies will cover their products, like their jams and jellies and all that, and that's not the case at all. That's generally an add-on.
I feel like we have so much insurance for our farm because we do
Yeah,
some agritourism. It's like I don't even know half of it anymore. It's crazy.
sure.
All right. Terry asks, how big does a farm have to be to qualify for insurance?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So sorry, it's like a little bit stunning maybe because you can be a small scale farm to, by many standards, selling just at farmers markets, having a small CSA and get insurance. It's a matter of what is your risk exposure, meaning like what assets do you have that are at risk, and your willingness to get coverage for them and pay those premiums to have that coverage. In terms of food safety liability, if you are selling products to the public, whether at a farmer's market, they may require you to have, like what Samantha was talking about, product liability coverage because you're selling your products to the public. And so many insurers, because that is a common practice at farmers markets, do have product liability policies available to farms that may consider themselves quite small. So that the best way to find a policy, if you think you are a small farm, is to shop around, try to get some quotes just to get an idea what insurers are out there and what those premiums look like. But unless you are a very, very tiny, hobby farm just getting started, I would be surprised if you couldn't find something.
Okay. Diane asks, what type of insurance could cover sales of soap, goat? Oh my gosh, I'm going to start again, Diane. I'm so sorry. What type of insurance could cover, it's all those C's, sales of goat or sheep milk soaps or lotions, etc. And actually, that's really great, Diane, because that's I'm on the I'm not on the board of our farmers market now, but I have been in the past, and that always comes up. It's like, when do you draw the line with product liability, and who has to provide product liability? Is it just things you ingest, or is it also should you get liability for things that you put on your skin, or expect producers to have liability for stuff that goes on their skin? So thank you for asking that, Diane.
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I don't know from like the skin irritant injuries perspective, but for sure for anything like soaps or cosmetics or candles, like just like a commercial business insurance policy would cover, if your stock were to get damaged, if you're warehousing it somewhere and like the warehouse burns down, or you leave it in a car and like someone steals it, commercial business insurance would be what would cover that, but from a skin irritant perspective, I'm not sure. Yeah, we'll have to look into that.
All right. Christina asks, if your farm is an LLC under your social security number, do you really have personal asset protection since the farm and your personal assets are linked by your social security number as opposed to having a separate EIN?
Okay, that I appreciate that question so much because it brings up there's just like this question of what is the protection of an LLC. So when you form an LLC, whether you are a single member LLC using your social security number or an EIN, having an employer identification number, you're creating this entity with your state that basically is a promise to the state that you're operating your business as separate and distinct from yourself as an individual. And just because your social security number is tied to it does not render that useless or null and void. That's just part of how the state knows that it's you who is involved in the LLC. What generally will put the LLC at risk is if you are running personal and business expenses out of the same bank account. If you are not up on your administrative paperwork where you're filing your annual report and paying your annual fees, depending on what state you're in. Some states do it every other year or every 3 years. Some states you only do it once, which is curious. But just staying on top of those things, or if you aren't staying on top of those best practices for an LLC, that is what can allow someone seeking a judgment to pierce the veil, so to speak, to access those personal assets. It's not, because you put your social security numbers attached to the LLC. In fact, it needs to be for that pass-through taxation to work.
All right. Well, if anybody else has any questions, I did drop in the chat. Campbell Risk Management has very affordable insurance for small farms, and it's specifically for people who are selling at farmers markets and farmers markets themselves. My farmers market uses Campbell Risk Management as well. They don't charge you extra for additionally insured or anything like that. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay, I've got a couple more questions. Thank you guys. Sylvia asks, is NAP insurance for vegetable? Will NAP insurance cover for vegetables? I think is what she's trying to ask.
Sure. Yeah. Then
what is NAP insurance?
It's a type of federal crop insurance called, I think it's non-insured agricultural products, which is a popular option with diversified farms, especially veggie farms. That type of insurance is for crop loss and damage, and so not for someone getting sick from eating the food. So two different things.
Okay. And Christina says, I'm having a hard time finding coverage for farm activities that involve contact with animals, for example, goats. Any recommendations on how to find this coverage?
Our best recommendation is to talk to other goat farmers, folks who have goats and are doing similar activities on their farms that you are, and ask them, do you have coverage for this event? Who's your insurer? Do you like them? How much they charge you? And, ask around with your peers. That's the best way to find out.
And I when we were doing summer camps, which I did for like 25 years, it was really hard to get insurance for summer camps. We found that our homeowners insurance covered it when we were renting farmland. So our farm activities were on rented land. But as soon as we moved to a larger farm that we owned and we're doing the summer camps on our own land that we owned, they would no longer cover it. So we had to find somebody else. And if you're in North Carolina, High and Rubish, that's our insurance company, and they even cover like we used to do herd shares, and they do herd shares as well. So it's just like basically every herd shares are raw milk. So anyway, but they cover our summer camps under their general farm liability insurance. So I don't know if but I know Farm Bureau won't. At least, but Farm Bureau is different. Every county's Farm Bureau is different and they do different things. But that's what I was able to do. But summer camps, which I imagine would be something even easier to get something just for doing like farm visits or something. All right, so there's no more questions, and that puts us on pretty close to time. I am going to go ahead and share my screen if I can open it up. Get on the right slide. Okay, so I do have a couple of housekeeping items to cover before we sign off today. A recording of this webinar and the slides and the links, the PDF link, and then I'll also share all the links to everything that we've done with Farm Commons, all of those webinars, and they will be available in the next few days. These documents will be archived on our website, and I will email them to you, like I said, probably tomorrow. We also have some other good webinars coming up this winter. I'll send a link to all of our upcoming webinars and other opportunities for farmers and ranchers in that same email. A sincere thank you to Eva. It's been a wonderful pleasure. I also want to thank everybody out there in the audience. This stuff, it's a little heavy and sometimes it's easier to ignore some of this stuff, but really the best thing you could do for yourself is get the right insurance, and it can be a pain. But once you get that perfect insurer, you'll do anything to keep them. But anyway, thank you guys so much. I am going to go ahead and say goodbye and have a wonderful afternoon and get yourself insured. Goodbye, everybody.